Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. Like Jake just said, if you have any questions, you can put those in either the Q&A box or the chat box, and I'll facilitate those at the end of the webinar. Additionally, I'll put our contact information in there. So if you have any follow-up questions you'd like us to answer or would like to request a meeting with us after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to either Jake or I. We'd love to connect with you. Additionally, this will be recorded, so we will send you a recording of the webinar for you to view after the fact. And with that, I will turn this over to my colleague, Jake. Jake, take it away.
All righty, thanks, Clay. So thanks for joining us today, everybody. My name is Jake Faber. I work here at Upstream Tech, supporting our conservation partners who are looking to get started using remote imagery and data to do all sorts of cool things with monitoring and restoration and lots of other great work with natural resource management. So today, I figure we'll go through just some of the basics to start out and then get a look into some examples in Lens. Again, if you've got questions, things you want to make sure that we cover along the way, be sure to drop those in the Q&A, and we'll get to anything that we don't cover at the end. So by way of introduction, here at Upstream, we're a mission-driven technology company. We produce software tools that help to accelerate the pace, the scale, the impact of conservation work. We have over 30 folks on our team at this point who work in all sorts of areas, ranging from remote monitoring and software engineering to land conservation and environmental science. Our goal specifically with Lens is to make remote monitoring accessible and efficient. We've got an easy-to-use tool that's focused on conservation resource management that we'll be getting into here. But basically trying to take some of those tools that might feel kind of intimidating, might feel kind of difficult to use, and really bringing those to any team that might benefit from accessing them. So Lens is our really easy-to-use web-based application. It serves as a one-stop shop for any satellite and aerial data that you might need for whatever projects you're working on. Again, it's something that we designed specifically for managing natural resources and other conservation priorities. And we really try to make it a streamlined tool where you can do all sorts of monitoring, analysis, report generation, all in one place, and share that with everybody on your team. You can use Lens for all sorts of different uses, as I mentioned, whether that's for quickly detecting changes like we see here on this property in Pennsylvania, where there are conservation protections, and we're seeing some change over time related to expansion of this building structure. You can see some changes to some of the trees that were planted over here. Now, small scale changes like that, as well as longer time scale changes, such as this tree planting project in a mitigation site in Florida. Beyond that, we also can use all sorts of other tools beyond those tools that you might be familiar with from other areas, where you can see what the landscape looks like to our human eye, using things like this vegetation data to visualize things like disturbance impacts, wildfires, invasive pest damage, all sorts of other things. Building on some of that, we also have other analytical and machine learning driven tools that help to bring automated processes to some of this work, which can be really neat, especially when you're managing areas that you don't always get the chance to go out to in person. Here we're looking at an example from Northern California of a timber harvest that we were alerted to. We'll go into some of those examples a little bit more in just a bit. And like I mentioned, part of this too is not just being able to access data to observe what's going on in the landscape, but also to really be able to share that out and do something with that, to take notes, generate reports, and really go through the documentation process so that things that you find can be acted on. And in order to do all of this, we partner with lots of different data vendors to basically bring you the best available remote data that we can get our hands on from some of these folks that you may be familiar with: Airbus, Maxar, Planet, and all of these others. The idea here is that as you're going in, accessing these tools in Lens and doing what you need to do, you can really decide on a case-by-case basis what's going to work best for the specific questions that you're trying to answer. And that may vary project by project, might be different for different types of landscapes that you're working in. And as you can see here, these are a few of the ones that we use most commonly, range across some of the finer scale resolution to coarser resolution, higher frequency, lots of different data tools that we can work with here to help support whatever use cases you've got in mind. And again, this is something we built specifically for natural resource and conservation uses. The idea is that it brings this new toolkit that you can work with for whatever situation you've got in mind. We provide a diverse set of options so that you can pick and choose what's going to help to answer the questions and challenges that you're facing. And you can also use this to work collaboratively across your team, monitoring things like park, open space, visualizing risks to landscapes from things like erosion, invasive species. You can also use it to support resilience planning and thinking ahead. The other nice thing here too is that I know that a lot of agency teams use all sorts of different tools to get their job done, and Lens is something that really complements a lot of the existing conservation tools that folks use really well. So we'll get into that a little bit more as well as we look things over. So just to give you a sense of who all has been using Lens over the last couple of years, especially, we've grown quite a lot. We've got over 180 organizations currently working with us. A lot of those are nonprofit, government agencies. We've got a few of the folks that we work with here. And all said and done, we've got over 34 million acres of land that are being monitored in Lens today. So lots of folks all over the country and internationally as well. We also try to keep our pricing really affordable for government agencies. Again, recognizing that trying something new can be a challenge. We want to make this as accessible as possible. So lots of information about pricing on our website as well, but just for a quick capture of what that looks like, got those details here too. So with that said, hopefully that gives you a bit of a high level idea of what it is that we're looking at here. But as always, I think it's best just to really get in and take a look at some examples. So with that, let's go and pop right into Lens. So like I said, this is a web-based application. It's something that anyone on your team can access regardless of where they are. You don't have to download any software to your machine. And one of the nice things too, for those of you that may have a little bit more experience working with geospatial data, is that you really don't have to know all that much going into this. It's something that we've got folks who are really experienced GIS users who are in here. We've got folks in here who, might be, say, less familiar with different technology tools and get comfortable with this quite quickly. So as we go in, it's a pretty familiar web map interface, right? Anybody who's used Google Earth really can get an understanding pretty quickly of how to go in and, for instance, just get some context of where we are in the world. Here we're looking at a state park in upstate New York. Maybe some of you have passed through Saratoga. So we can see here that this property boundary right here in white is going to be the area that we're looking at right now. So we specify that area of interest, and then we always kick in this buffer area outside of that as well, recognizing that things like boundary encroachments, what's going on neighboring sites is always going to be important too. So as we go in, you'll see right now, this is an image that comes from one of the aerial data sources that we work with. And this looks as if our human eye was up above the landscape looking down. So we see, some structures here, some planted fields, some more natural wooded areas. And as we go in, we can start to identify, those changes over time really quickly as well. What we can do is pop into this compare mode. So let's say, for instance, that I want to see what changed in the year between March 2020 and April of 2021. I can have those images line up side by side, and hopefully, this being a protected park, there's not a whole lot that has changed that's going to be unexpected. But we can go in and confirm that, right? We can, for instance, come over here and pull up some different notes that I and other colleagues of mine have noticed as we've gone in and done this. So for instance, I noticed that looking back a little bit further in time from 2013, there's been some development of new recreational facilities over in this part of the park. So we can see where that impact has taken place and track that over time. Similarly, we could go and take a look just outside the park boundary, some of the access areas, especially for pedestrian use. There's been some expansion of crosswalks and different traffic easing measures. For instance, over here, this new turning lane, and you can see some of those really fine scale issues. These cars are very easily visible. We can see center lines on the road. We can see individual trees and structures. So just to give you a bit of a sense of what that might look like. We also can take a look at, like I said, those longer term changes. But we can even pull in data that helps to give us a sense of things that we can't even see. So an example of that is using one of the data sets that captures images of the landscape globally every 5 days, and that comes from the European Space Agency Sentinel program. So to look at something a little bit different, here's what we can see with that. This is going to show us an index of these darker greens corresponding to lots of photosynthetic activity happening, high vegetation vigor, good healthy vegetation. compared to areas where there's less vegetation. And if I come over to this part of the property right over here, these planted fields again, we can see where a clearing of that field occurred, specifically down to just a couple day period in June of 2018. So with all of this, it gives us a really good way of accessing these different data layers really quickly, starting to document what we see, making those observations, and then again, doing something about it. So let's come back over here just to play with some of the true color data a little bit more. So here again is what that looks like, back a couple years in the past. But let's say that I wanted to go and see what this looked like more recently. I could go over here to this order tab. And again, we have data that we work with from many different data providers, including some of these commercial satellite imagery vendors like Airbus and Maxar. You may have heard of them before, or even seen some of their imagery in other tools. So let's say, for instance, I wanted an image from last year that met certain specifications. Maybe I want one of the higher resolution data sets that I can find. I can specify that and go and see which of these images might fit the bill for, say, a monitoring visit where I wanted to go and just know what was happening at a particular point in time, maybe last spring, let's say. I could pull this image up, and this boundary that I've created is just shy of 600 acres. So if I wanted to order that image, that would then process from the vendor and be ready for us to use in Lens, usually in about 10 minutes or so. And that cost us about 8 cents an acre. So in this case, it's going to run us about 35 bucks. That sounds good to us. We go ahead and hit that order button, and then it's ready for us to use along with all of these other data layers that we've already pulled in. So some of these also go back quite far in time. We've got these data from USDA's NAEP program that go back to the early 2000s for most areas in the US. And we've got others that are more recent. There are some satellites that we work with that just launched in the last year, for instance. So the technology is always changing, but we keep up with that and make sure that everything that could be helpful to you is available right here, one easy place to use. Another thing that I'll note too is sometimes, especially for agencies that manage larger parks and open space, it may be the case that you don't need to order imagery for a whole unit at a particular time. So let's clean things up a little bit here and take a look at this partial imagery ordering tool. So let's say, for instance, that I just wanted to see what was going on in this agricultural portion of the property. For that 166 acres, I could go back to that same image, and rather than ordering the full 35 bucks, we can keep the price tag under $10. So that can also be a helpful tool, especially for folks that have larger land holdings and interests that you're trying to look at. So let's move on then to another example here. There's a site down in North Carolina. I actually used to live in this part of the world, and I was well familiar with some of the difficult, traffic concerns and things that really impacted my bike commute along this road right here. And so it was really neat to see that in the last couple of years, the city of Asheville, North Carolina, did some really fantastic work to revitalize this green space, build some new greenways, create some new traffic calming measures. And so we can track the progress of that in Lens and see what that impact actually looks like. So again, let's come over here to our notes that we've created. So if I wanted to go in and make a note of something I saw, I could come in and just plot that right here. I could specify coordinates on the map if I knew exactly where that was located, or I could drop a pin or a polygon right on here, and then create notes that look just like this. So let's look at just some background context here. So I included this image, which is one of the planning documents from this particular site. The new traffic circle that was going to be installed there, and we can see some of the greenway structure that was coming in along French Broad River there. So as we go along, we can see what that change looked like between 2016, let's say, and 2021 when that project was completed. Let's zoom in over here, for instance. If I wanted to see what the before looked like and the after, we can really clearly see how much has actually changed in this neighborhood. We also can see what that looks like today, which I think is kind of cool. So a good way to track progress on those sorts of larger scale planning projects, down to whatever scale, if that's larger landscape scale or more of a city park kind of scale. So thinking about other neat stories that we can tell here, looking at some of these different note-taking and observation tools, we're also able to track progress on, say, restoration work. So here's a kind of neat story that I love to share. So this was a really cool partnership between the state of South Carolina, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and a number of other agencies and local nonprofits. So we've got the city of Charleston right over here, Charleston Harbor with the shipping channel that comes up to the port, comes along through here. And then we have Crab Bank, which is this really interesting little island. So back in the day, we're looking at an image right now from 2009. There was this small island where a major waterfowl nesting habitat had persisted for many decades, and as many as 5,000 migratory birds had nested there per year. Unfortunately, in 2017, after many years of erosion, the island went from this to this. There was no high ground any longer that could support any of those migratory birds. Back in the day, again for reference, this is what that might have looked like. So, like I said, though, there was a really interesting project that took place through this partnership. So, there was a proposal to deepen the shipping channel going into the port of Charleston, which produced a lot of extra fill material that was being excavated up from the bottom of the water there. And what they were able to do was take that fill to help restore the island. So, going from that to starting to look something like that. We can see actually some of the activity here as well from one of the on the ground views. So that's some of the dredged material coming up to create that new landmass. And finally, on December 1st of 2021, officials announced that they had successfully restored over 32 acres of nesting habitat. So from absolutely no high ground anymore to a perfectly usable bit of nesting habitat. And of course, we like our happy ending. And so this past summer, there were over 500 nesting pairs that were observed there, including some of these black skimmers. So a really great opportunity for using that sort of partnership to produce this really great outcome. And of course, in Lens, we're able to see that and track that really clearly. One of the other things we can do as well, thinking about the storytelling aspects of this, is we can really easily spit out a report of all those notes and observations that we've made along the way. So in this case, if we wanted to show that overview of what that site looks like today, or that more current up-to-date example, we can have the source data right here. We see what that looked like. And then for any observations we made, we also can get these before and after shots. And maybe I want to specify a certain area of that. We can manipulate the maps very easily. And we can see where that came from, who made this observation, when they made that observation, what they saw, any of those associated details for any of those observations. And we can go in and, edit this as well as needed. So that can be a great way just to share that out and, have something either for record keeping or for submitting to, oversight agencies, or also just for sharing with project partners to help explain, what it is that you're seeing out on the ground. One other thing I'll note as well, thinking about ways that we can take what we're seeing in Lens, using that imagery that we pull in to observe our sites, we can also share out some of the actual imagery that we're using too. So let's say I wanted to pull out one of those higher resolution images that we're looking at right now. We can spit that out as a PNG. And then for some of the data sources, we even can do geotips. So if you're a GIS user, those can be helpful for any more advanced cartographic projects that you may be working on. We also can do streaming of some of these layers directly into a GIS platform using this server link. So those are some of the ways that we think about, just the process again from start to finish of going in, accessing some imagery for sites that you're trying to manage and monitor, making some of those observations, seeing what you can see. And one other thing I'll note as well is that we even have some alerting tools which can help us to detect things like vegetation change or even ownership of certain parcels that you may be working with. Let's hop back to our North Carolina example for just a moment. There's a good example there of, in this case, a site where the owner of this parcel changed in 2016. We can get a record of that. We also have all sorts of other overlays and different things that you can pull into Lens to help to contextualize the things that you might be seeing on the imagery. So in this case, if we wanted to pull up that parcel data, it's right here ready for us to use. So lots of ways that we can supplement the aerial data to help tell the story of that view from above. So I'll pause there for a moment. Would love to hear what other questions folks are curious to explore a little bit more. There are plenty of other features we can get into in some more detail, depending on what folks are thinking of for potential applications that you have in mind. So Clay, I'll pause there for a moment to put it back to you if you'd like to give me an idea of what folks would like to hear some more about.
Sure. Yeah, just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. We've already got a couple. The first one, Jake, is can you provide any other examples of what can be done with that European Space Agency satellite that you showed that showed the vegetation data? Are there any other like environmental data layers that has?
Yeah, there's all sorts of cool cool sources that we can use with that. So let's take a look. Let's start with this one out here in California. Actually, I kind of like this example, and it gets into those alerts a little bit in a little bit more detail as well. So this is a working forest in Northern California. There's obviously been some timber harvest activity if we take a look at some of these different parts of the property over time. So let's say we're looking to monitor what's going on here at a given time. It can be kind of difficult to know when a certain activity might be taking place. So let's come back over here and I'll show you just some of these different, this higher frequency data is one that we're going to be looking at right now. That's what's coming from that every 5 days global data coverage from the European Space Agency's Sentinel program. So we've got a couple of these different index layers that we derive from that, looking at things like the vegetation, surface water, surface moisture. So in this case, working forest, we want to know about that vegetation cover. So again, this is going to be looking at the high versus the low, essentially photosynthetic productivity. So how much is happening in terms of vegetation growth at that moment on this landscape. So the way this is calculated actually is kind of cool because when a plant is photosynthesizing, it's going to reflect different types of light differently. And so we can use this to basically render that in a way that makes sense to us when we can't go out on the landscape and necessarily just discern that ourselves. So with these alerts, like I mentioned, we can get a notification when there's been a change in the vegetation cover, in particular when there's a change that persists for at least 3 of these sensings, right? So it's not going to be something that's like a random blip that, came once and disappeared. It's not going to be something like a fall leaf drop that happens every year on a seasonal cadence. So in this case, we've got this alert that showed us that over here, our machine learning algorithm detected that there was a potential change that occurred. So if I go to that part of the property and pull up these 2 images, we can see that April 2018, this looked like it was consistent forest cover. We're seeing some like brighter green values there. And then there's this very specific change that occurred that brought that down. So if we go and investigate a little bit further, pull up some of that true color imagery, let's go 2016 to 2018 for reference. So here, in fact, we can see that there was a change that occurred going from forest to clearing. There are all sorts of other ways that we can use that too. There's a color infrared layer that is really helpful for identifying things like burn scars. We can look at rendering it in all of these different ways to see, for instance, over here, those red values help us to identify some of those clearing in this brighter contrast. So again, helping to pinpoint where we might want to focus for our attention. There's also another example that I really love down in coastal Louisiana. So if any of y'all are familiar with that part of the world, coastal land loss and subsidence are huge issues. Lots of local and federal planning efforts go into figuring out what to do with coastal wetlands in Louisiana that provide a lot of really important native habitat, as well as a really important feature for resilience of those coastal landscapes. So down here in South Louisiana, we've got this example here. I want to focus on this little spit right there. So we're looking at this in true color right now, seeing where there's open water, some of that marshland. And let's go and take a look at, say, the surface moisture. So this is going to indicate to us, and for particular sensing, we might see, let's go back to, let's pull up this December image. It has a little less cloud cover. That's those gray bits are masked out clouds. So we can see where there's more saturation of that versus more dry land. And I can use this analyze area feature actually to help pinpoint where some of the changes over time may have occurred. So with this spit right here, I happen to note there's something interesting that's been going on. So let's take a look at the surface water. In this case, a little bit more of a specific dry land, open water distinction. And we can see that over the last year, not a whole lot has changed. But we can go back to when the satellite launched in 2015, and in just a moment, it will pull all of those sensings from every 5 days going back to that point. And with that, we can help to identify these long-term changes. In this case, some of the increased presence of open water there, which can correspond to the experience of land loss. So we can, let's pull, that one has a lot of cloud cover in it, but let's start with that one. Maybe do a comparison back to Let's do somewhere around there. See what we can see. So 2019 to 2022, if I zoom in a little bit, we can start to see, well, let's go. I think actually I pulled a note recently of one of these. Yeah, there we go. That part of the property, put those two side by side. And we can see where that coastline has receded really clearly. And again, from dry land to more open water. So lots of different applications we can think of here for coastal resilience, for invasive species. We've seen this with fungi moth, for instance, where there's been defoliation of native vegetation. We've seen this with agricultural use cases. Lots of ways that we can use this to sort of supplement that higher resolution view that we also can provide through some of the other data sources.
Nice. Thanks, Jake. Next question we have from the audience is, what does the base subscription cover versus purchasing specific imagery or high resolution imagery?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when you subscribe to Lens, a couple things are available to you right off the bat. So that's going to be the public data from sources like European Space Agency, what we're looking at here with these different indices, as well as if you're in the US, any NAPE data. So that's from USDA's National Agricultural Imagery Program, it's called. That typically comes in every couple of years, is really great for providing some historic baselines and some other uses. But that's all data that's available for us to process immediately. And then with the commercial data, so that's going to be, by commercial, I mean some of those private companies that are producing data every day around the world. They're sort of often following the demand wherever folks sort of typically think, like real estate, insurance, oil and gas, like some of those types of industries will often request images for a particular place at a particular time. When they do that, we get to access those through their archives at these discounted rates. So that's why when we come over here to order an image, we see all of those that have been made available up to this point. And we can pick and choose which of those might serve our needs best. So once you get in, those are the images where it's sort of up to you to decide which ones you want and when. So when you order those, that will be on that per acre basis. But otherwise, all of the note-taking tools, all the analytical tools, the reporting tools, the public data that's already available to you is all going to be ready to go right when you start your subscription.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more question. Let's see. Do you all have a place where we can read about some of the other use cases, or just a little bit more about Lens if I want to explore more after this?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Clay, has already shared contact info for us in the chat. So reach out if you've got specific questions, because I know that this varies a lot depending on what type of landscape you're working in, what kinds of projects you're working on. But we've got, again, over 180 organizations that are doing this all over the place. So we've certainly got lots of great examples to share. A couple of those, so right on our website, the Explore tab has lots of different stories from some of the case studies of partners that we've worked with. There are some other resources that get into a little bit more of the technical detail. We've got lots of support documentation that makes it really easy to find anything that you're looking to know more about as far as how specific features might work. And then we've even got some other educational resources here, and other demo examples too, if you're looking to find some more examples from things like say trails in a national forest, or in this case a dam removal project on a river in Washington. So lots of other resources to check out there as well.
Great. Well, thanks so much. It looks like we're at time, and thank you everyone for coming today. This was recorded, so we'll send out a recording for you to reference later, and just really appreciate y'all being here and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, y'all. Keep going.
Bye.